is not simply the way life comes to us, but is the way all things really exist. In these talks, I've had to say a good deal about prayer. And before going on to my main subject tonight, I'd like to deal with a difficulty some people find about the whole idea of prayer. Somebody put it to me by saying, I can believe in God all right, but what I can't swallow is this idea of him listening to several 100 million human beings who are all addressing him at the same moment. And I find quite a lot of people feel that difficulty.
Hello, welcome back. We're going to continue and finish our study of C.S. Lewis' Mere Christianity today. This is an exciting lesson because it talks about new people, new men, and that's what we are to become. So, continuing our reading, we're in the section titled Beyond Personality, the first steps in the doctrine of Trinity, of the Trinity. So let's go ahead and start. The chapter we're reading today, there's two chapters, and both of them have to do with new men. So let's continue. He meant what he said. Those who put themselves in his hands will become perfect, as he is perfect, perfect in love, wisdom, joy, beauty, and immortality. The change will not be completed in this life, for death is an important part of the treatment. How far the change will have gone before death in any particular Christian is uncertain. I think this is the right moment to consider a question which is often asked. If Christianity is true, why are not all Christians obviously nicer than all non-Christians? What lies behind this question is partly something very reasonable and partly something that is not reasonable at all. The reasonable part is this. If conversion to Christianity makes no improvement in a man's outward action, if he continues to be just as snobbish or spiteful or envious or ambitious as he was before, then I think we must suspect that his conversion was largely imaginary. And after one's original conversion, every time one thinks one has made an advance, that is the test to apply. Fine feelings, new insights, greater interest in religion means nothing unless they make an actual behavior better. Just as in an illness, feeling better is not much good if the thermometer shows your temperature is still going up. But there is another way of demanding results in which the outer world may be quite illogical. They may demand not merely that each man's life should improve if he becomes a Christian. They may also demand before they believe in Christianity, they should see the whole world neatly divided into two camps, Christian and non-Christian. And that all the people in the first camp at any given moment should be obviously nicer than all the people in the second. This is unreasonable on several grounds. In the first place, the situation in the actual world is much more complicated than that. The world does not consist of 100% Christians and 100% non-Christians. There are people, a great many of them, who are slowly ceasing to be Christians, but who still call themselves by that name. There are other people who are slowly becoming Christians, though they do not yet call themselves so. There are people who do not accept the full Christian doctrine about Christ, but who are so strongly attracted by Him that they are His in a much deeper sense than they themselves understand. There are people in other religions who are being led by God's secret influence to concentrate on those parts of their religion which are in agreement with Christianity, and who thus belong to Christ without knowing it. Many of the good pagans, long before Christ's birth, may have been in this position. And we see some of those in the Bible. And always, of course, there are a great many people who are just confused in mind and have a lot of inconsistent beliefs all jumbled up together. Consequently, it's not much use trying to make judgments about Christians and non-Christians in the mass. It is in some use comparing cats and dogs, or even men and women in the Mass, because there one knows definitely which is which. Also, an animal does not turn, either slowly or suddenly, from a dog into a cat. If you want to compare the bad Christian and the good atheist, you must think about two real specimens whom you've actually met. Unless we come down to brass tacks in that way, we should only be wasting time. Suppose we've come down to brass tacks and are now talking about an imaginary Christian and an imaginary non-Christian. Let's say two people in our neighborhood. We have to ask the right question. If Christianity is true, then it ought to follow that any Christian will be nicer than the same person would be if he were not a Christian, and B, that any man who becomes a Christian will be nicer than he was before. Christian Miss Bates may have an unkinder tongue than unbelieving Dick Firkin. That by itself does not tell us whether Christianity works. The question is what Miss Bates' tongue would be like if she were not a Christian, and what Dick's would be like if he became one. Miss Bates and Dick, as a result of natural causes and early upbringings, have certain temperaments. Christianity professes to put both temperaments under new management if they will allow it to do so. What you have a right to ask is whether the management, if allowed to take over, improves the concern. Everyone knows that is what is being managed in Dick Firkin's case is much nicer than what is being managed in Miss Bates. That is not the point. Let us go a little deeper. Christ has finished with, and now let us go a little deeper. The manager is going to put in new machinery. Before Christ has finished with Miss Bates, she's going to be very nice indeed. But if we left it at that, it would sound as if Christ's only aim was to pull Miss Bates up to the same level on which Dick has been all along. We've been talking, in fact, as if Dick were all right, as if Christianity was something nasty people needed and nice people could afford to do without, and if niceness was all that God demanded. But this would be a fatal mistake. The truth is that in God's eyes, Dick Firkin needs saving every bit as much as Miss Bates. In one sense, niceness hardly comes into the question. The niceness, in fact, is God's gift to Dick, not Dick's gift to God. In the same way, God has allowed natural causes working in a world spoiled by centuries of sin to produce in Miss Bates the narrow mind and jangled nerves which account for most of her nastiness. It is something that he can freely give him or freely refuse to him. Will they or will they not turn to him, God, and thus fulfill the only purpose for which they were created? Their free will is trembling inside them like the needle of a compass. But this is a needle that can choose. It can point to its true north, but it need not. Will the needle swing around and settle and point to God? He can help it do so. He cannot force it. Do not misunderstand me. Of course, God regards a nasty nature as a bad and deplorable thing. And of course, He regards a nice nature as a good thing, good like bread or sunshine or water. But these are the good things which He gives and we receive. He created Dick's sound nerves and good digestion, and there are plenty more where that came from. It costs God nothing, so far as we know, to create nice things. But to convert rebellious wills cost His crucifixion. There is a paradox here. As long as Dick does not turn to God, he thinks his niceness is his own. And just as long as he thinks that, it is not his own. It is when Dick realizes that his niceness is not his own, but a gift from God. And when he offers it back to God, it is just then that it begins to be really his own. For now Dick is beginning to take a share of his own creation. The only things we can keep are the things we freely give to God. What we try to keep for ourselves is just as what we are sure to lose. We must therefore not be surprised if we find among Christians some people who are still nasty. There's even, when you come to think of it, a reason why nasty people might be expected to turn to Christ in greater numbers than nice ones. That was what people objected to about Christ during his life on earth. He has seemed to attract such awful people. That is what people still object to and always will. Do you not see why? Christ said, "Blessed are the poor," and how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom. And no doubt he primarily meant the economically rich and economically poor, but do not his words also apply to another kind of richness and poverty? One of the dangers of having a lot of money is that you may be quite satisfied with the kinds of happiness money can give, and so fail to realize your need for God. If everything seems to come simply by signing checks, you may forget that you are at every moment totally dependent on God. You are not one of those wretched creatures who are always being tripped up by sex or nervousness or bad temper. Everyone says you're a nice chap, and between ourselves, you agree with them. In other words, it is hard for those who are rich in the sense to enter the kingdom. It is very different for the nasty people, the little, low, timid, warped, thin-blooded, lonely people, or the passionate, sensual, unbalanced people. If they make any attempt at goodness at all, they learn in double quick time that they need help. It's Christ or nothing for them. If they are the awful set he goes about with. And of course the Pharisees say still, as they said from the first, if there were anything in Christianity, those people would not be Christians. Remember, the devil was an archangel once. His natural gifts were far above yours, as yours are above those of a chimpanzee. But if you are a pure creature, poisoned by a wretched upbringing in some house full of vulgar jealousies and senseless quarrels, do not despair. He knows all about it. You are one of the poor whom he blessed. He knows what a wretched machine you're trying to drive. Do what you can. One day, perhaps in another world, but perhaps far sooner than that, he will fling it on the scrap heap and give you a new one. Niceness, wholesomeness, integrated personality is an excellent thing. We must try by every medical, educational, economic, and political means in our power to produce a world where as many people as possible grow up nice. Just as we must produce a world where all have plenty to eat. But we must not suppose that even if we succeed in making everyone nice, we should have saved their souls. For mere improvement is not redemption, though redemption always improves people, even here and now, and will, in the end, improve them to a degree we cannot yet imagine. God became man to turn creatures into sons, not simply to produce better men of the old kind, but to produce a new kind of man. It is not like teaching a horse to jump better and better, but like turning a horse into a winged creature. Of course, once it got its wings, it will soar over fences which would never have been jumped, and thus beat the natural horse at its own game. But there may be a period while the wings are beginning to grow when it cannot do so. At that stage, the lumps on the shoulders may even give it an awkward appearance. Remember, what can you ever really know of other people's souls, of their temptations, their opportunities, their struggles? One soul in the whole creation you do know, and is the only one whose fate is placed in your hands. If there is a God, you are, in a sense, alone with Him. Okay, so he talks about being nice, and that's a great thing. And us as Christians, we should be moving towards being better people. But that's not the goal of God. The goal of God is to make us sons of His. So we talk about this new man, this new creation. He goes on. In the last chapter, I compared Christ's work of making new men to the process of turning a horse into a winged creature. I used that extreme example in order to emphasize that it is not a mere improvement, but a transformation. The nearest parallel to it in this world of nature is to be found in the remarkable transformations we make in insects by applying certain rays to them. Perhaps a modern man can understand the Christian idea best if he takes it into connection with evolution. Everyone now knows about evolution, though of course some educated people disbelieve it. Everyone has been told that a man has evolved from lower types of life. Consequently, people often wonder, what is the next step? When is the thing beyond man going to happen? Imaginative writers try sometimes to picture this next step, the Superman as they call him, but they usually only succeed in picturing someone a good deal nastier than the man we know now, and then try to make up for that by sticking on extra legs or arms. But suppose the next step was to be something even more different from the earlier steps. And is it not very likely it would be? Thousands of centuries ago, huge, very heavily armored creatures were evolved. If anyone had at that time been watching the course of evolution, he would have probably expected that it was going to go on to heavier and heavier armor, but he would have been wrong. The future had a card up its sleeve which nothing at that time would have led him to expect. It was going to spring on him little naked unarmored animals which had better brains, and with those brains they were going to master the whole planet. They were not merely going to have more power than the prehistoric monsters. They were going to have a new kind of power. The next step was not only going to be different, but different with a new kind of difference. The stream of evolution was not going to flow on in the direction in which it had been flowing. It was in fact going to take a sharp bend. Now it seems to me that most of the popular guesses at the next step are making just the same sort of mistake. People see men developing great brains and greater mastery over nature. But because they think the stream is flowing in that direction, they imagine it will go on flowing in that direction. But I cannot help thinking that the next step will really be new. It will go off in a different direction you could have never dreamed of. It will hardly be worth calling a new step unless it did. I should expect not merely difference, but a new kind of difference. I should expect not merely change, but a new method of producing the change. Or to make an Irish bull, I should expect the next stage in evolution not to be a stage in evolution at all. Should expect that evolution itself as a method of producing change will be superseded. And finally, I should not be surprised if the thing happened. When the thing happened, very few people noticed it was happening. Now we get to the point. Now, if you care to talk in these terms, the Christian view is precisely that the next step has already appeared. And it really is new. It is not a change from brainy men to brainier men. It is a change that goes off in a totally different direction. A change from being creatures of God to being sons of God. The first instance appeared in Palestine 2,000 years ago. In a sense, the change was not evolution at all, because it is not something arising out of the natural process of events, but something coming into nature from outside. But that is what I should expect. We arrived at our idea of evolution from studying the past. If there are real novelties in store, then of course our idea based on the past will really not cover them. And in fact, this new step differs from all previous ones, not only coming from outside, but in several other ways. First, it is not carried on by sexual reproduction. Number two, at the earlier stages, living organisms had either no choice or very little choice about this next step. But the new step, the step from being creatures to being sons, is voluntary. At least voluntary in one sense. It is not voluntary in the sense that we ourselves could have chosen to take it or could have even imagined it, but it is voluntary in the sense that when it is offered to us, we can refuse it. Number 3, I've called Christ the first instance of the new man, but of course he is something much more than that. He is not merely a new man, one specimen of the species, but the new man. He is the origin and center of life of all the new men. He came into the created universe of his own will, bringing with him Zoe, the new life. I mean new to us, of course. In its own place, Zoe has existed forever. And he transmits it to us not by heredity, but by what I have called good infection. Everyone who gets it by personal contact with them, other men become new by being in him. Number 4, the step is taken at a different speed from the previous one. Compared with the development of man on this planet, the diffusion of Christianity over the human race seems to go like a flash of lightning. For 2,000 years is almost nothing in the history of the universe. Never forget that we are still the early Christians. The present wicked and wasteful divisions between us are, let us hope, a disease of infancy. We're still teething. The outer world, no doubt, thinks just the opposite. It thinks we're dying of old age. But it has thought that very often. Again and again it has thought Christianity was dying by persecutions from without and corruptions from within, by the rise of Mohammedanism, the rise of physical sciences, the rise of great anti-Christian revolutionary movements. But every time the world has been disappointed, its first disappointment was over the crucifixion. The man came to life again. Number 5, the stakes are higher. By falling back at the earlier steps, a creature is lost, at the worst, its few years of life on this earth. Very often it did not lose even that. By falling back at this step, we lose a prize which in the strictest sense of the word is infinite. In an ordinary birth, the baby has not much choice. Here it has. I wonder what an ordinary baby would do if it had the choice. It might prefer to stay in the dark and warmth and safety of the womb. For of course it would think that the womb meant safety. That would just be where it was wrong. For if it stays there, it will die. On this view, the thing has happened. The new step has been taken and is being taken. Already the new men are dotted here and there all over the earth. Some, as I have admitted, are still hardly recognizable, but others can be recognized. Every now and then one meets them. Their very voices and faces are different from ours, stronger, quieter, happier, more radiant. They begin where most of us leave off. They are, I say, recognizable, but you must know what to look for. They will not be very like the idea of religious people which you form from your general reading. They do not draw attention to themselves. You tend to think that you are being kind to them when they are really being kind to you. They love you more than other men do, but they need you less. They usually seem to have a lot of time. You will wonder where it comes from. In that way, to become holy is rather like joining a secret society. To put it very its lowest, it must be great fun. It's something like this with Christ in us. The more we get what we now call ourselves out of the way and let Him take over, the more truly ourselves we become. There is so much of Him that millions and millions of little Christ, all different, will still be too few to express Him fully. He made them all. He invented as an author invents character in a novel. It is no good trying to be myself without Him. The more I resist Him and try to live on my own, the more I become dominated by my own heredity and upbringing and surrounding and natural desires. In fact, what I so proudly call myself becomes merely the meeting place for trains of events which I never started and which I cannot stop. In fact, eggs and alcohol and a good night's sleep will be the real origin of what I flatter myself by regarding as my own highly personal and discriminating decision to make love to the girl opposite to me on the railroad carriage. Propaganda will be the real origin of what I regard as my own personal political ideas. I am not in my natural state nearly so much a person as I like to believe. Most of what I call me can be very easily explained. It is when I turn to Christ, when I give myself up to His personality, that I first begin to have a real personality of my own. Christ will indeed give you a real personality, but you must not go to Him for the sake of that. As long as your own personality is what you're bothering about, you're not going to Him at all. It will come when you're looking for Him. Does that sound strange? The same principle holds, for more everyday matters. Even in social life, you will never make a good impression on other people until you stop thinking about what sort of impression you're making. Even in literature and art, no man who bothers about originality will ever be original. Whereas if you simply try to tell the truth, you will, 9 times out of 10, being original without ever having noticed it. The principle runs through life from top to bottom. Give up yourself and you will find your real self. Lose your life and you will save it. Submit to death of your ambitions and favorite wishes every day, and death of your whole body in the end. Submit with every fiber of your being, and you will find eternal life. But look for Christ and you will find Him, and with Him everything else is thrown in. So we end here with C.S. Lewis telling us about this new person, this new being, which we can be through Christ. And that finishes the book. Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis is not an easy book to read, but it's probably one of the most beneficial books you will ever read, because it will make a point of instructing you and educating you about what being a Christian is and what it means and how to do it. It in no way substitutes for the Bible, but it is a clarification of some of the things in the Bible. So I'd encourage you to read it and study it. And again, thank you for this time that you've spent with us in our study on Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I hope you have a good day.